A Russian soldier in eastern Ukraine learned something strange after a few weeks on the front. The artillery is loud, the tanks are loud, even the drones have a sound, a mosquito buzz that means you should probably run. But the thing that really unsettles people isn't the noise, it's the pattern. You move into a tree line at night. 30 minutes later, a drone finds you. You relocate to a trench. 20 minutes later, artillery walks in. You try shifting positions before dawn. Somehow a small Ukrainian assault team is already waiting in the next set of ruins. At first, it feels like bad luck. Then it keeps happening. Then someone finally says the quiet part out loud. Azov is in this sector, and suddenly the front line doesn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It feels like a hunting ground, because the Azov Brigade has spent the last decade turning war into something disturbingly efficient, a continuous cycle of detection, strike, relocation, and repeat. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If a normal military operation looks like a battle, Azov runs something closer to a production line, and Russian soldiers have started describing it with a grim joke. Working a position opposite Azov is like standing behind the counter at McDonald's. Orders just keep coming, except instead of burgers, the product is Russian casualties. Now, before we get into how that machine works, there's something important to understand. Azov didn't appear out of nowhere. This unit was built in the kind of war that tends to produce very dangerous soldiers. Urban fighting, encirclement, close quarters combat in cities where every doorway can kill you. The kind of war where the difference between surviving and dying often comes down to a few seconds and a very small team that knows exactly what it's doing. And Azov has been living inside that environment since 2014, which is why when the full-scale invasion began in 2022, something unusual happened. Most units were learning how to fight this war. Azov already had a decade of experience, and that experience produced one of the most aggressive assault formations anywhere in Ukraine. But to understand why Russian planners pay so much attention to this brigade today, we need to go back to the beginning, because the story starts in a city that Moscow thought it could take in a few days. Mariupol, June 2014. At the time, eastern Ukraine was sliding into chaos. Russian-backed separatists had already seized several major cities in the Donbass. Armed groups were setting up checkpoints, declaring people's republics, and preparing referendums meant to detach large parts of Ukraine from Kiev. Mariupol was next. Pro-Russian fighters had taken control of government buildings and were preparing to stage a vote that would link the city to the separatist territories forming in Donetsk and Luhansk. If that had succeeded, the strategic map of southern Ukraine would have changed overnight. Mariupol sits on the Sea of Azov, a key port, a major industrial center, and a potential land bridge between Russia and Crimea. Losing it would have been a serious problem. Ukraine didn't have a lot of organized forces available at that moment. What it did have were volunteers. Among those volunteers was a small unit that had formed only weeks earlier under Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs. They called themselves Azov. At the time, it was just a battalion, a few hundred fighters, light vehicles, some captured equipment. Not exactly the kind of force that usually retakes a city, but war has a way of rewarding speed. On June 13, 2014, Azov launched a fast assault into Mariupol. Armored vehicles pushed into the city. Small teams moved building to building. Separatist checkpoints were overrun in rapid succession. By the end of the day, Ukrainian forces had regained control of Mariupol. The referendum never happened, and the name Azov started appearing in military reports. Now here's the part where the math begins to change, because once a unit proves it can fight, and more importantly, keep fighting, it tends to grow. That's exactly what happened. Through the rest of 2014, Azov participated in heavy combat around places like Marinka and Ilovaisk, and then became part of the defensive line protecting Mariupol from further Russian-backed advances. The battalion expanded, first into a regiment, then into one of the most recognizable formations in Ukraine's National Guard. By November 2014, it had been formally integrated into the government's military structure. No longer just volunteers, now a permanent combat unit. But something else was happening inside the brigade, something that would later make Azov very difficult for Russian forces to deal with. The unit was developing a style of fighting that emphasized small teams, aggressive movement, and decentralized decision-making. Not big Soviet-style formations, not slow trench warfare, small groups, fast strikes, independent initiative. In other words, something much closer to the way NATO special forces tend to operate. And that culture stuck. For the next several years, Azov rotated through frontline sectors along the Donbass, places like the Svitlodarsk Arc, where the front lines zigzagged through ruined towns, forests, and industrial zones. The brigade conducted raids, counter-sniper operations, small pushes that gradually moved Ukrainian positions forward, sometimes only a few hundred meters, sometimes a kilometer. But over time, that experience built something extremely valuable: institutional memory. Because urban warfare is one of the most difficult forms of combat in the world. Cities create layers, basements, stairwells, factories, apartment blocks, and every one of those spaces can hide an enemy. Fighting inside that environment for years forces soldiers to become extremely methodical. Clear a room, clear a floor, clear the next building, repeat. And Azov became very good at it, which turned out to be extremely important when Russia launched the full-scale invasion in February 2022, because one of the first major targets on Moscow's list was Mariupol. Again, except this time the battle would look very different. When Russian planners looked at Mariupol in early 2022, the calculation probably seemed straightforward. The city sat directly between Russia and Crimea. Capturing it would complete the land bridge along the Sea of Azov and remove a major Ukrainian port from the map. In theory, the operation should have been quick. Large Russian forces pushed toward the city from multiple directions. Artillery began leveling entire districts. Airstrikes hit infrastructure and industrial zones. Mariupol was surrounded within weeks, and inside that encirclement were several Ukrainian units. One of them was Azov. Now here's the thing about urban warfare. On paper, the side with more artillery usually wins. But cities create something that frustrates armies that prefer open terrain: complexity. Every street becomes a channel. Every apartment block becomes a fortress. Every factory becomes a labyrinth. And Mariupol had something else: the Azovstal steel plant. If you've never seen the place, imagine a small industrial city sitting inside a much larger city. Massive furnaces, endless pipes, thick concrete, underground tunnels built during the Soviet era. It wasn't designed to be a fortress, but in the way Soviet infrastructure often was, it accidentally became one. When Russian forces pushed into Mariupol, Ukrainian defenders gradually fell back into that industrial complex. And for the next 86 days, the Russian army discovered something deeply unpleasant. Azov knew exactly how to fight there. Small teams moved through tunnels and service corridors. Snipers controlled access points. Drones scouted Russian movements above the plant. Every attempt to storm the complex turned into brutal close-quarters fighting. Now, it would be dishonest to pretend this ended in some cinematic victory. Mariupol was eventually captured. The defenders ran out of supplies. Azov fighters were forced to surrender in May 2022. But wars aren't just about territory. They're also about time. And Azov bought a lot of it. The defense of Mariupol tied down large Russian forces for nearly 3 months. Troops, artillery, and aircraft that could have been pushing deeper into Ukraine were instead stuck grinding through a single city. From a strategic perspective, that mattered. But there was another consequence. Azov became globally famous. Footage from the siege spread everywhere. Videos of soldiers fighting from ruined buildings and the underground tunnels of Azovstal circulated across the internet. For Russia, the unit became a propaganda obsession. For Ukraine, it became a symbol of resistance. But here's the detail most people miss. While the Battle of Mariupol was still raging, Azov was already rebuilding, because not every member of the brigade had been trapped in the city. Some officers and fighters were outside the encirclement when Russian forces closed the ring. Those men began forming a new Azov unit near Zaporizhzhia. Volunteers started arriving. Veterans from other fronts joined. The skeleton of the brigade slowly took shape again. And by the time the Mariupol defenders were captured, the process of rebuilding had already begun. Now here's where the story takes an interesting turn. In February 2023, Ukraine reorganized several elite formations under what it called the offensive guard concept. The idea was simple: create large assault brigades built specifically for offensive operations, units designed to break Russian positions rather than just hold defensive lines. Azov was expanded again, not just a regiment anymore. It became the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov, a full combined arms formation. And if you look at the structure of the brigade today, you can see exactly how it's designed to fight. Multiple special forces battalions form the core assault element. There's a tank battalion for armored breakthroughs. An artillery group provides long-range fire support. An anti-aircraft missile battalion protects the brigade from drones and helicopters. And perhaps the most important piece of the entire system, an unmanned systems battalion. Which brings us to the modern battlefield. Because the war in Ukraine today doesn't look like the wars people remember from television. The old image of two armies staring at each other across trenches isn't entirely wrong. But something new has been layered on top of that battlefield. Sensors, drones, thermal cameras, electronic surveillance. It's the difference between navigating with a paper map and using GPS. In older wars, finding the enemy was often the hardest part. Today, the battlefield is full of eyes. Small quadcopters hovering over tree lines, fixed-wing drones scanning kilometers of front line, FPV drones waiting to dive onto vehicles the moment they appear. For units that know how to use that information, the effect is dramatic. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack, you start hunting them. And this is where Azov's reputation on the modern front line really comes from. Because the brigade built a system around one simple idea. Never stop looking, never stop striking. The moment a Russian vehicle moves, a drone sees it. The moment a squad rotates into a trench, someone marks the coordinates. The moment a logistics truck appears on a dirt road, a strike team or FPV drone is already moving. Which means the front line stops behaving like a static trench war. It becomes something closer to a continuous surveillance zone. Russian soldiers entering a sector where Azov operates often discover that staying hidden for long periods becomes extremely difficult. Movement gets noticed, patterns get detected, and once that happens, the rest of the process moves quickly. Now here's the part where the metaphor in our title begins to make sense, because Azov didn't just create a battlefield unit. It created a cycle: find, fix, strike, reset. And once that cycle starts running smoothly, you can repeat it over and over again. Day, night, rain, snow, which is exactly how you turn a battlefield into a 24-hour operation. But to really understand how that machine works, we need to zoom in on the actual hunt. Because the way Azov units track and eliminate Russian positions today looks less like traditional warfare and more like a very organized form of stalking. Now let's slow this down for a second, because the way Azov fights today only really makes sense if you understand the cycle. War used to move in phases. You would scout the enemy, plan the attack, move artillery into place, launch the assault. Hours might pass between those steps, sometimes days. That kind of rhythm made sense in the 20th century, when the hardest part of combat was simply figuring out where the enemy was. But the modern battlefield in Ukraine works differently. Drones have collapsed the timeline. A quadcopter the size of a dinner plate can scan a kilometer of trench in minutes. Thermal cameras pick up body heat at night. Small FPV drones, the ones that look like racing drones, can travel straight into vehicles or bunkers with explosive charges attached. Suddenly, the gap between seeing a target and destroying it can shrink to a few minutes. Units that understand this new reality operate very differently. Instead of treating reconnaissance, artillery, and infantry as separate activities, they link them into one continuous system. Azov does exactly that. The brigade's unmanned systems battalion is the nervous system of the operation. Think of it as a swarm of eyes hovering over the front line. Small reconnaissance drones watch Russian trenches. Larger fixed-wing drones scan roads and supply routes. Thermal sensors search forests at night for movement. Once something interesting appears, a truck, a squad rotation, a vehicle moving between positions, the information flows down to the units on the ground, coordinates, video, movement direction. This is where the old battlefield model would normally pause. An officer might review the information, someone might call for artillery, orders would move up and down the chain of command. That takes time. Azov tries to remove that delay. Small assault teams already positioned near the front can move quickly toward identified targets. 3 soldiers, 5 soldiers, sometimes just a pair. They approach quietly, often guided by drone operators watching from above like air traffic controllers. If the Russians haven't noticed the movement yet, the assault group can get extremely close, sometimes within grenade distance, sometimes inside the same ruined building complex. At that point, the situation becomes very uncomfortable for the people on the receiving end, because once contact begins, several things happen almost simultaneously. The assault team fixes the Russian position, meaning it pins the defenders in place. Drones continue watching from above, adjusting the coordinates in real time. Then artillery or FPV drones join the party. Now imagine you're the Russian unit in that trench. You're suddenly dealing with small arms fire from one direction, explosive drones diving from above, artillery beginning to bracket the position, and the people directing all of this can see the entire battlefield from the air. It's a little like playing chess against someone who can see the whole board while you're only allowed to look at one square at a time. That imbalance is what makes the system so dangerous, because once the first strike finishes, Azov units don't simply sit there. They reset. Drones search again. New targets appear. Another team moves, another strike follows. The process repeats. This is why Russian soldiers sometimes describe the experience in strangely industrial terms. Not a battle, a process. Targets appear. Targets disappear again and again. Now, casualty numbers in war are always messy and hard to verify, but even Russian military channels began acknowledging something similar. Units rotating through sectors where Azov was active reported unusually aggressive Ukrainian counterattacks and persistent drone harassment. The sense that someone was always watching, which brings us to another part of Azov's reputation that doesn't show up in battlefield diagrams: psychology. Because war isn't only about firepower, it's also about what soldiers believe about the enemy. And for Russian troops, Azov carries a very specific image, one that Moscow's own propaganda helped create, but their own battlefield reality confirmed. It's no longer just about the name or the history, it's about the machine they've built, a system where the hunter never sleeps, the drones never stop buzzing, and the orders at the counter never stop coming. On the modern front line, Azov isn't just a unit anymore. It's a reminder that in 21st century warfare, there is nowhere left to hide.